Brands on Brands.
Hey, this is Lindsay Doztlaf from the Mastering Coaching Skills podcast. And if you want to build a brand that matters, like I did in my coaching business, you should be listening to Brands on Brands with my new good friend, Brandon Birkmeyer.
In a world where content is king and your reputation is your brand, how do you build a brand that matters? Welcome to Brands on Brands, a home for those that think different and push their boundaries. This is where branding that matters lives. Now, here is your host, Brandon Birkmeyer.
Hey, what's up? Welcome to Brands on Brands. I'm Brandon Birkmeyer, your personal branding coach, and I believe that building a brand that matters is the only way for a business to thrive tomorrow. Appreciate you guys tuning in each week. We are jumping into interviews, and I've got a bunch planned for you guys. Today, I'm excited because we get to talk to Lindsay Doztlaf, who is the owner and founder of the Coaching Masters Mastermind, the host of the podcast Mastering Coaching Skills, which is how I found her. And also, she's a coach of coaches. She helps life coaches and other coaches, business coaches, health coaches, become amazing coaches with those extra little skills that you need to learn along the way. And she's here to discuss everything from how she built her personal brand to how she thinks about getting out there, finding your first few clients, and building your identity, your message, and shares that with us here today. And guess what? She was able to grow a massive coaching company without those things that a lot of people think matter, without the logos, without the fancy websites and the Facebook ads and the click funnels, all those things. We talk about that, how you can do it just on the power of wanting to serve, understanding who you are, and taking those steps to get out there and promote yourself. Talking about all that today with Lindsay Doztlaf today on the show. Before we get into that, if you guys haven't been to this show yet or to the website, make sure to go to brandsonbrands.com/resources. That's where we keep all of our freebies, all of our checklists, and things that might help you move along the way towards building your personal brand. I appreciate you guys, and check out the show.
Brands on Brands.
All right, let's get going. I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Lindsay Doztlaf, to the show. Lindsay, thank you for being here first and foremost.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am as well. And the reason I'm excited is that we get to talk about personal branding, of course, but from the perspective of someone who built a successful coaching business from the ground up. But first, before we dive into like the branding stuff, I'd love to dive into your zone of genius, the things that you're doing every day that you're helping people with. And I know you have this program and you have a show and you have a brand around this concept of mastering coaching skills. I'd like to understand what mastering coaching skills means to you and why does that matter?
Yeah, I love that question. I could talk, but how long do we have? Hours?
We got days.
Okay, perfect. So to me, I learned to coach from hiring a coach. I love everything about coaching because it changed my life, changed so many things for me. And I worked with a coach for a couple of years before I decided I wanted to be a coach. And I think coming in it from that perspective, I just, the power in coaching is so huge for me, right? Like just the actual craft of coaching. And then I went and got certified eventually. And I just started meeting all these coaches that just had a kind of a different entry into coaching than I did, right? Maybe they found out about coaching, life coaching, business coaching, whatever it was, and thought like, oh, I could do that. And maybe never worked with a coach on their own until they kind of learned to coach somewhere and then maybe hired a business coach or, something like that to help them in their business, help them make money. But what I noticed is that there was just really this gap between them and not just them, a lot of coaches, right? Like learning how to coach and then making lots of money in their business, and a gap that was kind of like, but I don't know how to do the day-to-day things, right? I know the method. Maybe I went and learned a very specific thing wherever they got certified or whoever they learned from. But then, I remember even for me, when you start taking clients and you're working with clients one-on-one, clients don't all fit perfectly into this box and just show up exactly like you think they're going to and just get results every time, right? A lot of things happen that is a little bit like, oh my gosh, nobody told me about this. What am I supposed to do? And so that's kind of the gap I fill.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of things. You might be good at your skill, like you're a technician at the thing. Like I'm a good baker, I'm a good accountant. But then you start this business, and then now you're up against that wall where you're like, I now have to be a good business owner and marketer and all these other things. And that's a new skill set. How did you like come to this idea that you're like, okay, this is something I want to teach people?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about that, I think that it's really from my love of coaching. So I really started as a general life coach. I was coaching just women on their lives and women who were, similar to me at the time. And that was great. I loved coaching on all the things, their relationships, their kids, their, whatever it was, I was coaching on it. But really all I ever wanted to think about was why coaching actually works, right? Like, what is it about, even thinking about my past, like going through therapy, going through all these different modalities of things, trying to figure out, why I always felt so anxious and why I was having all of these emotions that I didn't understand how to process. Coaching changed that so much for me. And so that's really all I wanted to think about was like, why does this work? Right? Like, why is it so powerful? And how can we really learn to be very effective at the craft of coaching?
Yeah. And so this is funny, right? Because obviously, usually our passion and the things that we've kind of experienced just lead us down the road of, I guess this is what I'm doing now. This is the thing that I'm going to do. And the actual wording, though, you're like, okay, I'll call it mastering coaching skills. Like, was there a list of 20 things, or did you just say, I'm just going to call it what it is? It's very obvious. This is what it is. How'd you get to that?
I'm really big on naming things just what they are, right? So that's one. I'm a pretty analytical thinker. So for me, right, if I see a program that's called, create your intuition, or, something very like, I have no idea what that means, I'm not going to buy it. But that's just me, right? Like, that's
no offense to the create your intuition people. That
right.
course is killing it right now. No.
Surely that's not even a thing, right? I don't know. Maybe it is, but that's just not my language, right? I want to know, what is this thing that I'm buying? I want it to just be called that. And I tend to attract a lot of clients who are very similar to that. And a lot of my clients have advanced degrees, are very educated, and they have this concept of themselves that's like, I like to be very good at things. And that's kind of where I think this was born from, of like, you're good at all of these other things. Now I'm going to help you be really good at coaching.
Yeah. And I hope more people discover the value of investing in themselves and finding mentors and finding coaches to take them to the next level in any skill, whether it's exactly what they're doing or something that's just, on the side. I'm curious because each coaching space is different. When people are like, they encounter you, I'm curious how you explain what you do to people.
So, well, it's interesting now because of what I do, I only work with coaches, right? So a lot of coaches already know what coaching is, hopefully. So I don't have to explain it as much as I used to. But, when I describe it like I just said it a second ago, right? Where it's like, this is what I do. I'm going to help you like you already know how to coach. I'm going to help you take the skills you already have, deepen them, make them your own, and like really understand and know how you are helping your clients create the results that they want. Is probably the most simple way to say it.
Right. And if they're like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I imagine there's some like, I like that you actually started broader, because I usually tell people, like, if you're branding, you've got to start with the most obvious entry point, which is like, I help with branding.
Yeah.
Not, I help people discover their inner voice. And, it's like, no, I help with branding. Well, how do you do that? So how do you do that?
Yeah. I love this question because I actually asked this you may have heard me talk about it on my podcast. I also asked it in my mastermind, because coaches sometimes have such a hard time explaining what it is that they do, especially mindset coaches. But, if I get down to like the details of it, what does that look like? I help coaches feel confident and calm and certain in their coaching, right? I help them like show up knowing that they know exactly what they're doing, and like stop questioning whether they're good at it, stop questioning their skills. I really help them know that they don't need to go buy 14 other methods, right? It's not like a competition of like who can just buy the most different methods of coaching. I think, it really is. I like to keep things as simple as possible, because that for me at least tends to be the most powerful way to teach someone something.
Now, this is probably a little introspective, but a lot of people have trouble picking their niche. And figuring out, yeah, it's this thing that I want to help people with. And you came to it and you told us how you got there. But for the people that are struggling, I wonder how you would advise other people to figure out how to just find that thing that's for them. Is it try a lot of things? Is it chase their passion? Like, what would you say if you were giving advice to another coach, which you do all the time, of like them figuring out like the thing they want to help with and maybe even their message? What journey would you take them on to get there?
So I might teach this differently than some other people do.
This is why you're on the show, by the way.
Love it.
I'm looking for the different.
I'm like, ooh, makes me squirm a little bit. Like, oh, someone's not going to like this.
That's okay.
But really, this is how I did it, right? I think some coaches come into coaching knowing exactly what they want to do because they got here a certain way, right? They had some event maybe in their life that really impacted them and they hired a coach because of it, right? And they know that once they've worked through that, they have to coach on that thing, right? So for some people, that's business even, but for some people that might be like grief or, something that just is a very strong emotion that they had to work through, that they kind of overcame this thing in their life. And that's amazing. Do it. Like for sure. If you know that's what it is, do it. I'm not a fan of picking a niche just to pick one, right? Just for like marketing purposes or for branding purposes or for, being able to explain what you do, because I think that I think your niche in like air quotes can be the kind of technique or method that you use. It doesn't have to be I always joke the example of like the soccer mom with 2.5 kids and like the white picket fence or what, like something so specific that it's like, I only coach, 100 people in the world identify with this thing. I think it can be just, what do you help people with, right? Like, how do you help them? What is the technique you use?
All right. And I love that because I am also team no niche. I started actually, I'll admit this, I stumbled my way along in figuring that out myself. I left a marketing career to say, I'll be a marketing coach, like a consultant, whatever that is, that broadly, I'll help people with email, Facebook. But it helped me allow myself to try different things and change and pivot along the way. Cause I didn't want to be right off the bat, like, oh, I guess the last company I helped was a restaurant, so I can be the restaurant marketing guy niche. But that would have really limited me. And it wasn't a jacket that I wanted to wear for the next 10 years. So I had to try a bunch of things. So I think starting broad and figuring out, eventually you might get there. And it might be because of the people you like to help, or just because of something you found, like through content, I found my voice in figuring out what I wanted to do. So I'm a big fan of that too, of like starting a little more broadly and not necessarily being in a rush to niche down. But once you find that thing that resonates with people, I think it's great to focus and narrow in. If you'd agree with that, I don't know, but yeah.
Of course, I'm a big fan of just figuring out just what works for you, right? Because another way I didn't mention that sometimes people get into coaching is they're really good at something in their life. For example, I have a client who's a bookkeeper, right? She's a bookkeeper. She's CFOs for online businesses. And she came to me, to my mastermind, to learn the coaching piece, like how to add the coaching into what she was already doing, right? So I think that's also genius. But I also, one thing that I teach a lot is just learning how your brain works. And if you are a person who needs a lot of certainty, right, or needs direction, find that, right? Like figure it out. But I don't think that means picking a very specific niche just because you've heard from maybe someone that you're supposed to have one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what's funny is I hope people can see the nuance to this conversation a little bit, because this is all brand identity, which it's like, if you can't figure out who you are and what you want to tell people you do, you're going to be lost with all the marketing stuff, because it all comes down to your messaging and what you stand for and who you attract. So, but there's a lot in this conversation of what you do and what you're helping people with that I think a lot of coaches can learn from. But I do want to flip it a little bit and ask you, before we get into the actual, like how you grew your brand stuff, I am curious, you work with a lot of coaches. Mm-hmm. What do you see them struggling with the most that is something that you help with? It doesn't have to be in the branding space, just in general, like problems you run across all the time.
Yeah, I think so. One big thing, and I mean, this is what I coach on, right? So of course, this is what I see because this is what people come to me for. But one thing that just kind of stands out to me is I think in coaching, there can be a lot of ambiguity, right? Because we're talking about people's thoughts and like, how do they feel? And how does that influence every action that they're taking when you think specifically about like mindset coaching, right? And within that ambiguity, it can be hard as the coach to know kind of, am I doing it right? Right? Like, is it working? I don't know. And so that's kind of what I do, is help put a little more of a structure to that, and really help coaches help their clients figure out what their goals are, figure out how to measure them and how to like move in the right direction. But that's probably the number one thing I see coaches struggle with, is just the uncertainty of is it working? Do I know what I'm doing? Okay, I've worked with, 50 clients and I still am a little unclear of if it's working. Like, I know my strategies are solid, right? Like the coaches that also have lots of strategies in their coaching, they're like, I know that part, but I just get so confused sometimes when it comes to the thoughts and the emotions. Like, what do we do about that?
Yeah. Right. And especially in the life coaching space, there's a lot of topics you can help people with all over the board.
Yep.
I could see why that's a frustration, but also when you're trying to tell people about how you help, if you don't have this, like, how are you measuring that? What is success? And if you don't know how to define that, even in the health coaching space, you're like, unless it's lose 10 pounds, like if it's just live a healthier lifestyle, you're like, when did we hit our goal with this? And if you don't have it defined, it's going to be hard to have confidence in delivering a result of some sort. I love that.
Yes, that's such a good example. I work with so many coaches all over the industry. So health coaches, business coaches, life coaches, you name it, I've worked with them. And every coach has this problem. It's so interesting. Even the ones, right? Because I have lots of clients who are like, you should just pick something measurable, right? Like super measurable that has a number, like money, weight, right? Like something that has a number attached to it. And even those coaches sometimes get very confused about, but they haven't lost weight yet. I don't think that's the only thing that's important, but I'm not really sure and I don't know what to do, right? So it's really just like learning to explore those things with the client and asking them, well, what do you want, right? Like, what is your goal? Not the coach's goal, but the client's goal. What else do you want, right? Like, what else do you want that isn't lose 5 pounds?
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, I think it's easy once you've helped a ton of people and suddenly, like the momentum is already there. But for people that are still like building and getting started, or they've been dipping their toe in and trying different things out, I'd actually like to hear a little bit of not your, your advice, but more like your story of when you were finding your first customers and what that process was like, and some of the things that you encountered along the way.
So as I told you before we started here, I listened to a few of your episodes before we hopped on, just, to be sure I knew what I was getting myself into. And I resonated so much with what you said. And it was exactly how I built my business. I went out into the world and just told people I was a life coach. I truly just got comfortable saying the words, right? It's like the very first step for me was like identifying as a life coach and just being able to tell people that that's what I did, not in a way that I was trying to sell them on like, you need to hire me, right? But just really going out into the world and saying it. I went to networking events just to practice saying I'm a life coach and here's how I help. And I would practice saying it in 100 different ways. And I just would keep making connections. And, I remember doing this exercise at one point when I made my first $100,000. I think I just hit $100,000 in a calendar year, right? And I was so excited. And I did this exercise where I went back and thought about my first, I don't even remember how many, 10, 20 clients, something like that. And I wrote out like where I met them. Because at the time, I was really convinced that now that I was making a little bit of money, now all of a sudden everything had to change. I needed the best website, all the technical things that I didn't have. And my coach was like, hold on, just because you made money doesn't mean everything has to change, right? Let's revisit. Where did you meet? Where have you met the people? And it turns out, right, it was like, where did I meet them? Taekwondo, my neighbor, my daughter's friend's mom, right? Like just in my life, people I met in my life, no one that I purposefully went somewhere to find a person who wanted to hire me, but just truly being me and being out in the world, living my life, just telling people, this is what I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I wonder if you could even give us some examples of like what were the actual, if you could remember, maybe of like real places that you went, like you said, networking events, but like what were these events? Like what were some of them you had on your list? You're like, okay, I'm going to start being out there more. I'm going to join this club. I'm going to go to this group. Are we talking Chamber of Commerce? Are we talking like networking meetings? What are we talking about here?
So I made rules for myself because at first I just thought I'm willing to try anything, right? I'll just go to all of the places. And so I did. And it was a lot. And I don't want to say I went to too many, but it was just too many, right? Like I had little kids at the time. It was a lot. And so I started making rules like, okay, if I don't like something, I'm never going back. So, I went to and this is not a knock on this at all. I know people who have so much success with it. But for example, I went to like a BNI, that type of networking that you pay for. I was like, that's not my thing. I don't like it. I don't like to have to bring like referrals to other people, right? That just wasn't for me. I went to some that would be really heavy on like a big room full of men all in the tech industry. And it was like, okay, this is not my thing. Right. And so I just started crossing them off until I made rules that were like, okay, if there's wine, I'm definitely going. There's that. Right. Like they were silly rules, but it was like,
these are the rules. See, Lindsay, come on, Lindsay. This is why we're having this conversation. No one talks about this. Everyone says, go to the local business groups, check out, all those things.
Boring.
And I'll tell you, I had registered for 2 different chambers of commerce when I had started. I didn't go to one meeting because I was uncomfortable with the entire setup. And honestly, the local business owner isn't exactly who I wanted to be like attracting and doing businesses with. They're great, but like I didn't need to be the local flower shops ad guy. And, but to your point, there's certain types of events I'm like, nah, this isn't my people. So like, I like that we have the different rules here. And one of them is like, if it has wine, I'm in. Yeah.
If there's wine, I'm in. It's just a yes. And then if I don't like it, then I don't go back. But at least I had the glass of wine and that was great.
How are you finding these things? Are you just like, you're looking up like, okay, what are my general areas of interest? Like, how are you finding these types of things? Just Googling things?
Yeah. So I'm not doing it now because my business is in a place where I'm not, I'm more like now I get asked to come to things and speak. Right. But before I was doing things more like, Googling. I would look up, I can't think of what some of the websites, like Meetup. I think meetup.com is a website where that has just like a bunch of groups. And I didn't even look, this might be important to note. I didn't look specifically for, entrepreneur groups or marketing groups or, things like that where it was like, I was just going to meet other business people to talk about my business. I would look up things that I was actually interested in, right? Because it's like, those are the people, those are the connections I want to make. And at the time, those are the people who would have been my clients, right? Just like normal people, not necessarily entrepreneurs. And I also said yes when my friends invited me to all the places, right? Like even places that maybe I wouldn't have said yes to before, like a network marketing meeting or just things that I was like, yeah, that is their wine. I'll be there.
Yeah. See, and I like this because tapping into those, like, how do I just make more friends? It's like, it's almost like that Yes Man movie. You're like, I'm just going to say yes to all the things that like show up in front of me and then build kind of like, I think as you do it, at first you're like, well, I have all these things I don't like. But I think as you start to you learn and you self-select the things, you're like, well, I'm enjoying all of these other things, and even like moving to a new city is almost like a nice trial by fire. Because if you just leave all your current comforts behind, like we just moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm like, well, just naturally, I'm joining the like daddy daughter Y guides thing, which is like almost like a Cub Scouts. And I'm going to the daughters on the swim team. I'm going to all the meets and I'm meeting all the parents of swimmers. And, on top of like, I might join a co-working space and see how that's going. Yeah. It's almost like you have to force yourself into being like, if I had no people around, I had to meet more people just trying the things. I get that. And I love that. And that to me that's actually reputation building. Yeah. It's networking. I get that, but it's relationships. And to me, that's the part of branding that we don't get to talk about a lot is the relationship side. And I want to talk to you now, if we get into that little kind of branding stuff, how do you define that? Like, how would you define branding, like in the coaching space? Like what's important for like successful, like coaches?
So if you had asked me that yesterday, I would have said, I'm not really sure. Maybe like the way you show up wherever you go. It would have been a very, I don't know answer if you'd asked me on the spot. Right. But like I already kind of told you when you reached out to me, my first thought about branding, which is so funny because it's not actually what I consider to be branding, but my first thought was like, oh, logos and colors and websites and all of that, your Instagram grid or whatever. Right. And to me, those are all the things that just aren't important about branding. And the things that are, especially when it comes to the online space, really just showing people who you are. Right. It's like me being willing to be on here and say like, listen, if there's wine, I'm coming. That's like branding, right? That's me saying like, this is who I am. Some people are going to be like, oh, I do not like that wine. No good. Right. But that's okay. They don't have to work with me.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I'm curious, when did you start to see, because branding is just reputation to me. To me, it's all the things you did along the way to build a reputation that helps you out, that like that shows people the thing that is your truth, right? When did you start to see your reputation? Maybe it surprised you, like get out ahead of you a little bit. It was like, oh, like people knew you before you got there. Or, like that first time, like I remember someone came up to me at a conference and was like, I listened to your show. I was like, oh, you're the one person. Like, yeah. I don't know who you are. What's nice to meet you. Thank you for listening. When did you notice your reputation maybe getting ahead of you?
So the only very specific, and maybe it's because it just happened, but last week I actually spoke at a conference and led workshops at a conference for coaches. It was so interesting. I've never had this experience before. And it could be because pandemic, and I haven't been the last couple of years, right? I haven't been around as many people as I was in the past, like in person. But I walked into a room and I turned around and I was having a conversation with someone, and someone walked up to me and said, I recognize your voice from across the room. I'm obsessed with your podcast. And it really hit me in a way that it never has before, of like, whoa, right? Like just hearing my voice, she recognized me. It was a little weird for a minute, but it was like, okay, I think it's working, which I have lots of proof it's working. But I think exactly how you just said it, where it's like you have to catch up sometimes, right? Like your brain isn't all the way there. You can't really understand the impact you're having always in the moment. And it's little things like that really just, it's like a little nudge of like, you're doing it. Just keep going.
Yeah. And I've listened to your show. It's funny, I think like a lot of people, you kind of go down rabbit holes, right? And that's how the audiences are. They don't necessarily follow this track that we design as marketers, right? The customer journey. And I found you like through like the 6 degrees of other podcasts, where it was like someone was a guest on their show and then you were a guest on that person's show, and it kind of went down the road. And I just kept getting more and more curious. And I liked, I'm like, I listened to your shows. I'm like, these are skills I could use. This is amazing. I've taken some of that. I'm like, oh, she has like I always go back to first few episodes because I'm curious as to, I think when people are starting, like sometimes their most interesting knowledge comes right out at the beginning because you're so raw and you're like not saving anything. You're just putting it all out there. You have this amazing episode about explaining your coaching method, which I sent to like 3 people. I was like, this is what I've been trying to explain to people. They need to figure out how to do. And she explains it better than I do.
I love that.
But what I wanted to ask is, why did you start a podcast? Like how did this even come to your brain? Because these are decisions that I'm sure a lot of coaches come across and they're like, well, do I work on my webpage? Do I do an Instagram feed makeover? Do I start a podcast? Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah. So I think it's very similar to my answer to some of the other questions, which is really leaning into the thing that I love, right? So I love listening to podcasts. And, when my clients ask me, should I have a podcast? I mean, I've never listened to podcasts, but like, what do you think? I'm like, no. Right? Like, I mean, maybe, but go listen to some podcasts first and decide really what you like. I love podcasts. I would rather do that. Like if you go to my Instagram, you're not going to see reels of me doing crazy dances or, anything like that, because that's just not me. I'm not saying I'll never do one, but that is not my preferred method of putting myself out there, of marketing. And when I thought about doing a podcast and really just being able to share knowledge and share, kind of make an impact on an industry that I love in a way that's like, here is just free stuff. Like, please take it, please use it. If I can affect the industry just in the teensiest way, that felt so powerful for me. And it just like, that was the method that I thought, this is the way I want to do it.
Are you happy you did it?
Oh, my podcast is my favorite thing. And it is, I mean, if you go to my Instagram, I have maybe, I don't even know the number, but like less than 5,000 followers. So I do not have many followers, but I've had my podcast for about a year and have about 150,000 downloads, right? So it's like, it's working. That's because of my passion about it. I think people can hear that and feel it in the episodes. And it's pretty much at this point where most of my clients come from.
Amazing. I think podcasts are amazing. What I stumbled across was not just the attention part of it. There's just all these extra benefits that came. Like I was able to get my voice out. Like all these ideas in my head, I had a place to put them that I could refer back to.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started interviewing people, and suddenly these relationships were forming. I'm like, well, that's awesome. Like I get to know these people in a different way than I ever thought.
Yes.
That's amazing. And so these extra things that just kept adding. I was like, podcasts are great. Everyone should have a podcast, especially if you're in the coaching space. If nothing else, then to just have it as a tool sharpener and a network builder, if nothing else. Because I can go up to any author and speaker now and say, hey, I have a show. I'd love to talk to you about your coaching business or whatever else. And I'm not some weird fanboy that's just like, I love your stuff, So I think that there's some advantages there for sure. I'm glad that I found you because of this. I never would have stumbled across you had you not had a podcast. Like I'm just not in that world.
And the only thing I would say that might be a little different than your opinion, I'm not sure, but because I work with so many coaches, and because my podcast is very successful, they see that and think, oh, then I need a podcast, right? Everybody has to have a podcast. But I'm like, listen, but everybody kind of has a podcast. So you have to know, in my opinion, you want to know, like it's hard to build a podcast on, I'm just a life coach and I'm going to tell you that your thoughts like influence the results you get in your life, because there are 5,000, maybe more people doing that. And you just want to know, like, what's the differentiator, right? Like, I'm so glad that I waited and didn't just come out of the gate with a podcast, because it would have been a lot of pain and banging my head against the wall trying to figure out what to talk about.
Yeah. Build your business first. Absolutely. And I think that's a good point, because podcasting surprises a lot of people because they'll do it. It's a lot of work. It's more than you'd imagine.
A lot of work.
There's some cost to it. And then you have like 30 people listening and you're like, what happened? Lindsay said she's got a couple 100,000. Why didn't that just happen for me? And, it's like a build it, they will come. And I think it's more like you still have to, like, you wrote a book, but you have to still find a way to put it on bookshelves and get people to go buy it. You still have to do the promotion and the marketing and all that audience building stuff. It helps if you already have a good reputation in your industry and you can bring that with you. Absolutely.
Yes.
But yeah, it's not the easiest thing. But what I love, and the reason I say it's for I think it's for everybody, is because it's the most natural, I think, way that people can create content and put their thoughts out there. Because not everyone is like the fastest writer in the world, and not everyone is great on camera, but most of us can talk and share our thoughts without the pressure of cameras and whatnot. And if nothing else, if you just do that, hit record, and then take that and do something else with it, put your thoughts out there. You can convert a podcast into a book. You can convert it into a course. You can put it into all my social media and blogs all start from this content that we're doing right now. So if nothing else, it can be an engine, which I love, but it is not easy like anything else.
Of course. And I think even if you do just start one right out of the gate, right? Like, don't listen to me and be like, oh no, I did it wrong. I just started the podcast and now I don't know what I'm doing and nobody's listening. It's still such a great tool to develop your voice, to forcing yourself to create that content. I listened to one of your episodes about something about like, but you have to take the action. I resonated so much with that because I tend to overanalyze things and overthink things. And so you said something like but you have to just like take the action and then like be willing to feel whatever comes up. I forget.
Yeah. I think it was act and then feel and then think, as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah. And I love that because for someone like me, sometimes that's really good. It's like just force myself to do the thing and then see what happens, right? And then evaluate and maybe do it again. But for someone who's like that, starting a podcast, but just not even counting on it. Like when I first started, there were two things. One, I didn't want to do the tech. So I wanted to be making enough money that I could hire a producer, period. Did not want to do it by myself. But that certainly doesn't have to be done. And then the second thing was I was willing to do it for a year with no results, right? I just went into it like, I know my mom's going to listen and probably my grandma. I have like clients that love me. So a handful of them. So like, let's say worst case, 25 listeners for a year. Okay, I'll do it. Right. It's like, I got to that place where it was like, I'm willing to do this just because I'm going to love it, even though it's going to be hard for a whole year before expecting any results from it. And I just got results a lot faster.
Yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, like outsourcing the editing, absolutely. I think everyone should. Don't do it yourself because that's like hours worth of work that you don't have time for. But I bet you, because you can outsource it for like $25 an episode, roundabout. And imagine if you're doing one every week, that's like for a month. If you can't make $100 a month in your business, then you shouldn't start a podcast. You know,
Yes.
like that time is better spent on something else.
Yes.
I think that's the right way to think about it. Absolutely. And I like the commitment part of it because most podcasts go 8 episodes and then they stop. So if you don't have that commitment, then it's not going to work for you. As we're kind of rounding out the show here, I do want to get into a little bit of, as you're growing, you're in your business now, you're helping people out. What are some kind of core lessons that we can give our audience here that, the people who are maybe starting or they're just past starting and they're thinking, I want to build my coaching business. What are some core lessons? It can be marketing, can be anything, but core lessons that they can implement right now to help them move along the way towards success?
So one thing I would say, of course, I'm going to say this because it's what I do, but I think a lot of coaches get lost. I just see this happen where a lot of coaches get lost in the business aspect of it and the like, how do I market? And of course you have to do these things, right? Because people need to know what you're about, but thinking that there's a right way. And like, I need to learn the right way to market myself, the right way to build a website that you're totally going to want to redo in like a year anyway, the right way to, all of the business pieces. And what I teach is like, but don't forget to also be a really good coach because that helps with all of it, right? Like if my clients get results, I am really good at what I do. It's going to affect everything. It affects your marketing. It affects the way you talk about what you do when you go to the networking events or the, parties at your friend's house or wherever you're going. Right. And so that's probably the top thing that I would say. But then also probably on the other side of that is don't let yourself get lost in that. So if you are a person who loves to learn and really is like loves to be a good student, which I can identify with, you have to be careful to not, okay, I need to get this certification and then I need to do this other certification and then now I'm going to do Lindsay's thing, right? And it's like keep doing the thing to make sure I'm a good coach before I even coach anyone. Kind of have to learn to do them both at the same time and, maybe go back and forth on which one you're focusing on more in the moment, but really learning to combine them. Because if you don't have any clients, you can't practice all of the things that you're learning. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely inside and outside, right? It's like understanding what you need to be better, what you do, and to be clear on how you serve people, and then going to see those people. If you're afraid of one of those things, those are the things to work on. Absolutely. Because if people can't find you, if you build the billboard in the desert, then no one's going to see it. Absolutely.
Yep.
But I just really appreciate hearing from you today and going through like how this has actually been working for a real coach out there with the real business, not someone pretending, who's been successful and who didn't necessarily like, let me ask you, did you have a logo when you started that was amazing?
No.
Did you have a kick-ass website?
No, I actually learned to code and built my own website after I made the first 100,000 because I really thought I needed it. It took me so many hours, like pain, tears, literal tears. I never used that website, not once.
Right. And I'm guessing you also didn't have a ClickFunnels system set up that totally maximized.
I still don't.
There you go. And then on top of all that, were you running tons of Facebook ads to drive traffic and get discovered?
I have never run a Facebook ad. I just am about to hire someone, but I've made almost going to make close to $1 million this year. No Facebook ads. And not that that's bad. I have some clients who do really well with Facebook ads who they have a very specific niche and want to do them from the beginning. But that is a tough game, especially if you don't know exactly what you do and have a very specific person you're talking to.
Yeah. And guess what? You still have a brand. Like you still have a brand and your website is your name plus coaching, LindsayDoztlafCoaching.com.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something crazy or creative. Your podcast, Mastering Coaching Skills. I recommend it. I am a listener myself. Check that out. And where can they find you on the social medias?
So I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I just keep everything really simple. So everything is just my name. So on Instagram, it's just at Lindsay Doztlaf, and Facebook, same, just my name.
We'll have it all linked up for you guys. And if you at least get a chance to check out the podcast, Mastering Coaching Skills, type that in. She pops right up. Worth listening to and getting more familiar with how she teaches and what she's all about. And anything else you're excited about that's coming up?
I don't know when this is coming out, but I'm launching the next round of my mastermind right now. And then I'm also working on a program that I'm launching next year, which will be a lower priced offer for newer coaches to really help them deal with all the things that come up in the crazy things our clients do in coaching sessions that we don't know how to handle. And that's about it.
All right. And we're recording this. It's November 11th right now of 2021. So if it's 2022 when you find this episode, check it out.
That's right.
I appreciate you coming on today. And I hope you guys found value in all of Lindsay's tips. Lindsay, thank you again. And everyone else out there, we'll catch you next time.
You've just taken your marketing knowledge to another level with this episode of Brands on Brands. But we have plenty more ways to help you build a brand that matters. Head over to brandsonbrands.com for resources, as well as access to our blogs, videos, and exclusive coaching sessions with your host. Be sure to visit brandsonbrands.com.